I haven't got any slides or anything. You have just got me. I have freshly dyed my hair for you, so it's as vibrant as possible. And I have my R2-D2 scarf on, so hopefully that is all the focus you need. Hopefully. So the first time I heard people talking about teacher voice, I thought I knew what they meant. I had issues with that. I had a physical loss of voice in my first teaching practice and spent weeks at home with a whiteboard and pen due to laryngitis. Frustrating for me, but an absolute blessing to the people who knew me. But that wasn't the voice that was being discussed. Instead, it was something deeper, more meaningful, and of greater importance. Whilst we're all familiar with hearing the voices of students in our settings, for teachers, the changes that happen in education are largely done to us and not with us. And I knew that our professional understanding of what teacher voice meant had to change during the course of my research, when my voice was undermined by another professional, which had a detrimental effect on a pupil in my class. Now, this ultimately led for me to a whole change of direction in my research to focus on the concept of teacher voice and the importance of it for us as educators. So in this talk, I'll hope to make a clear case for the importance of hearing teacher voice from inside the classroom and suggest a way that we can hear as an authentic voice as possible. But first we need to look at the basics. There are issues right from the start for even agreeing on a definition of what teacher voice is. The concept of teacher voice isn't singular, and it's been acknowledged that it's woven from several different threads, which Brindley calls authenticity, the right to speak, and the right to have a political voice. This means that there are multiple definitions, where some may understand it in terms of having a voice at a national level within policies or politics. Some may perceive it as the right to criticise those in governance or leadership over them. Yet others might see it as having a voice in a particular area of expertise. However, I would argue that an authentic teacher voice encompasses all of these expressions and others within a complex and a messy system. So rather than trying to simplify teacher voice and risk losing some of the richness, we should instead embrace the complexity of it, just as we've done with the concept of student voice. Now, teacher voice is currently a popular topic in education, but this hasn't always been the case. Over the last 20 years, and I've been teaching for 14 of them, the importance of student voice in education has grown, but the relevance of teacher voice has been gradually undermined. This undermining has happened to teachers both at a macro, national level and a micro level within their own classrooms. Nationally, the introduction of a national curriculum and a centralised approach to teaching was identified by some research by Barbara and Graham as containing a hidden agenda to limit the voice of teachers. The role of teachers in being in control of their own classrooms and having a professional freedom has ended, and did end then, and the new era of control and conformity arose. It was within that system that I trained to be a teacher, how I learned to implement the required methods and plan for the given units. The fact that I once taught a unit about the seaside to a Year 2 class who had never seen the sea didn't matter. That was what the curriculum said, and that is what I had to do. Anyway, who would I discuss my issues with? Who would have heard my voice? Any concerns I had were silenced by the enforcement of education policy. And this control of the role of teachers has continued through the narrowing of a curriculum, an increased focus and progress measures, and in some cases the undermining of the teaching profession as a whole. Now, down at a classroom level, the largely hierarchical nature of our schools mean there's often little scope for teachers to have their voices heard, as those who are higher up in the hierarchy take precedence. Here, teachers can find their voices silenced by leadership, leaving them feeling disenfranchised within their own classrooms. Teachers are subject to overly complex marking and assessment policies, rigid behaviour codes which dictate how interaction should happen within their own classrooms. The role of a teacher is often less about a professional dialogue with school leaders about the ethos and culture of the school that they all work in, and it's more about staff performing their allotted tasks and duties. So how and where and do we hear from the authentic voices of teachers? Some, like myself, are lucky and that we find an outlet in research and we combine our work lives with something more academic. But that isn't the route for everyone. And instead, one way that teachers are increasingly sharing their voices at a national and a classroom level is through the telling of their stories on blogs and social media. Now, this has both positives and negative consequences for teachers. On a positive side, we can actually hear those genuine lived experience of teachers within their own classrooms. They provide a window to a world where policy and practice become living entities, and we can see how those policies play out at a classroom level. Surely this is the best way to see the genuine impact of how we teach phonics, the changes to the GCSE syllabus, or the use of restorative approaches, because practitioners in the classroom are experts at understanding and knowing what is effective and what works and why. And this in turn leads to a second positive, because we then, through social media and blogs, hear and value the knowledge that such practitioners have. They lead to discussions and debates about key topics. No teacher who's on Twitter, and I think many of us probably are, can escape conversations this year about Ofsted myths, pupil discipline, marking. We've all seen them. And teachers who are actively involved in sharing their voice in such forums share knowledge, skills and stories in ways that we just couldn't have done as a profession before. But there are negatives. First, there's often a lack of professional support by schools in helping teachers use social media and blogs. This means that teachers often use them with caution. Why? Because the seemingly utopian benefits that I discussed a minute ago are sometimes outweighed by criticism and public shaming. Now, don't get me wrong, I do not want to live in a world where everybody agrees with everything that someone else blogs or tweets. And in fact, I enjoy the opposite. We should all challenge and be challenged by the interactions we have. Yet social media can show this profession sometimes at its worst, and debate and dialogue can dissolve into personal criticism so quickly. A second reason why blogs and social media can cause problems is the question of ethics and anonymity. Now, we as teachers have a professional framework which we have to respect. The teacher standards doesn't specifically discuss online behaviour, but it alludes to ways that we have to conduct ourselves. For example, we should uphold public trust in the profession, maintain high standards of ethics and behaviour within and outside school. And also, we have to have proper and professional regard for the ethos, policies and practices of the schools we teach in. If we take those literally, it would be ethically wrong for a teacher to discuss on a blog, in an academic journal, in a conversation at a conference, anything which could have a negative effect on a student, colleague or school being identified. Now, this naturally limits how we can share our voices. This professional code of conduct gives us two challenges. First, how can we hear authentic teacher voices to engage and debate with at a professional level if we are naturally bound by an ethical code of conduct? And secondly, how can we benefit our students if we cannot openly discuss things and matters which affect them? Now, this is where my research comes in, and I'd like to suggest one way is the use of fictionalised narratives. Fictionalised narratives are also known as ethnographic fiction, and we can understand them by comparing them to a form of popular writing, such as historical novels. So if you think back to the 2009 novel Wolf Hall, which was made into that television series by Hilary Mantel, We can all agree that Wolf Hall was a work of fiction, with the author responsible for imagining the dialogue, the emotions that we see and we saw the characters enacting. But we can also agree that it was a tool for sharing knowledge and information about the life of Thomas Cromwell and that specific part of history. So whilst the events did happen, they are presented in a way imagined by the author. And this is exactly how fictionalised narratives work in education, with one of the best examples by a teacher called Clough, who wrote 5 fictionalised narratives around education and teaching. And this was the style I adopted when writing my thesis, because I desperately wanted to share the stories that the case studies I was working with were sharing, but I had to be really sensitive because they were 8-year-olds who'd been permanently excluded from school. Fictionalised narratives are brilliant because they lend themselves to sharing this highly sensitive information, and they aim to show the truth of what people say or do, but yet also remain untrue at the same time. And we can use them to overcome some of those boundaries we discussed above. And they are a brilliant way at trying to engage teachers in having more of a voice in education. So why is hearing an authentic teacher voice so important? Firstly, if we as teachers are able to express our voices with competence, we are better suited to be able to support our learners to do the same. Secondly, the stories that teachers tell are so important. There is a wealth of knowledge inside your classrooms that needs to be voiced. Hearing these voices can improve classroom relationships, reduce teacher turnover, and improve academic outcomes too. Thirdly, teacher voice is so linked to our own identity. The lack of having a voice and the impact on health and well-being can absolutely change the way that teachers view themselves, their role, and their own professional development. But finally, and more crucially, having our voice heard, the freedom of expression is a basic human right. And I would advocate that fictionalised narratives are one way which teachers can use to share those authentic voices from in the classroom, whilst protecting themselves, their students, and their colleagues. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you.